Can everyone see those slides okay? Yeah, perfect. Okay, yeah, thank you so much for that warm welcome, yeah, Ali and Una, and I just wanted to also say how excited I am to be joining the department in Glasgow in October. Having done my undergraduate in Scotland and coming from Scotland, it feels like a real homecoming, and I'm just really excited to get to know all of the colleagues in the department and also more broadly across the Scottish academic community, particularly the SCCJR. So yeah, really looking forward to working with you. As Ali mentioned, I'm also imminently about to go on maternity leave in a couple of hours, in fact. So you have caught me feeling extremely pregnant, and I hope I can hold it together for the rest of this presentation. But I just really appreciate the chance to come here today and give you a taste of some of the work that I've been working on over the past year with Una and colleagues. And yeah, look forward to your questions. So to give you an overview of what I'm going to discuss today, as Una said, I'm going to be talking about this large project I've been a part on called Operation Bluestone Soteria, which is ultimately looking to improve the way in which the police are responding to rape and other forms of sexual violence investigations in England and Wales. So I was going to start with an overview of the landscape currently, just a very brief overview of the policing responses in England and Wales now, and talk a bit about the larger project, because there's lots of different components to it, before really focusing down on the work package that I've been leading, which is looking at how to improve the way in which the police are engaging with victim survivors of sexual violence, particularly by trying to apply a procedural justice approach to their responses. So here I'm using the term victim quite often in the slides to reflect police language, but I'm using that as synonymous with survivor. Because the project's ongoing, there's only so much I can say in terms of the emerging themes and recommendations that are coming out of the project, but I will give you a taste of where we're going with those, and then talk about some of the outputs we have planned and that are in progress and next steps for the project. So I'm sure all of you are really aware of how problematic how much negative attention the police have had in recent years about how they're responding to sexual violence, domestic abuse, violence against women more broadly in England and Wales, but across the UK. We've faced repeated calls for transformational change being needed in this area. So we know, for example, that rape and other forms of sexual assault are really underreported to the police, but when those reports are made, that there's well-documented poor criminal justice responses that don't result in a fair or just outcome for victim survivors. Just today, a really significant report published by the police and crime prosecution inspectorates jointly identified systemic failings in police and court responses to rape across the entire criminal justice process. And we're seeing this in terms of plummeting justice outcomes, charge and convictions being at a record low, an average of just a couple of % of reported sexual violence, and not even the cases that are going unreported. And also now more than half of victims not supporting justice, prosecutions going forward, presumably because the process has been so arduous. So all of this is coming at a time where there's a particular cultural moment, I think, where there's a lot of scrutiny on policing and the way in which police are responding to sexual and domestic abuse with the Me Too movement, but also with lots of scandals going on, particularly focused around cases of officer poor practice, concerns about occupational cultures, minimising sexual violence, and then also officer wrongdoing themselves, like particularly in reference to the Sarah Everard case, but also these larger indicators of really poor justice outcomes in the area of rape, which is hopefully leading to this cultural moment where there is political and public recognition and appetite that we need a sustainable, transformative change for how we're responding to rape nationally. I think it's important to, beyond the sort of context of the moment, to really recognise that we have extensive existing evidence of poor police responses, and lots of recommendations for change have happened across the years, but change has proved elusive. So, you know, there's so much academic research out there that documenting the extent of sexual violence, problematic policing responses, and how victims are denied justice, of course, including some fantastic work in Scotland being led by Oona and Michelle and others around victims' justice journeys. We also have so much evidence from the third sector and from victim survivor voices and experiences themselves, who've been lobbying for change for decades. But I think the project that I'm working on, the concern that has been, the concern about maybe why some of the transformational change has not yet happened, might be because criminal justice responses to this evidence has repeatedly been a focus on improving police training, and focus on training, but not really thinking about the broader picture. And I think the project has really led with saying we need to disrupt business as usual holistically and look across all these different streams of the way in which the criminal justice system is engaging with sexual violence, to try and make embed change that's happening across all these different areas. So some concerns that are coming up in the literature that haven't really been addressed in policy recommendations and practice include like ill-informed narratives and investigations about, you know, what sexual violence is, how it operates, officers having a very isolated focus in cases, and so not looking at repeat offenders or repeat incidences. There being, of course, a very concerning focus on victim credibility over the actions and culpability of the suspect, and also very little engagement with evidence-based policing, so engaging with police data and just trying to produce effective data to direct investigative practices going forward. So all of these are elements that the project are bearing in mind as we start with our aims to improve sexual violence responses. So just to give you an overview of the project, it's being led by Dr. Katrin Hohl and Professor Betsy Stanko, who have come up with this conceptual framework that we're working in. And it's funded by the Home Office and is being managed through the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. And we're working at the moment with 5 police forces in England and Wales. And the structure of the project is basically, over the course of this first year, we've done 5 deep dives, which is a very Home Office friendly word, which involves basically going in for about 12 weeks to each force, all of the academic teams going in to understand the current practice, like the current as is, and trying to identify problems with any problems or examples of good practice that can be shared and developed in relation to the sexual violence responses. So we started off with a pilot project in Avon and Somerset Constabulary, and then across this year we've also been working with the Metropolitan Police. Currently we're working with Durham Constabulary, and then we'll be going on to work with the West Midlands and South Wales Police as well, repeating the same process of going in to try and understand the particular challenges and practices going on in each force. And just to give you an overview of the structure of the project, as I said, it's a really large project, and it's been broken down into 6 different work packages that are trying to collectively address that holistic approach to sexual violence investigations, ultimately trying to underpin like organisational enablers and procedural justice, and create sustainable change. So there's one work package that's looking at trying to reorientate the rape investigation to being suspect focused rather than victim focused, which is led by Miranda Hovarth. There's another pillar working very closely with the suspect focused investigation, looking at targeting and disrupting repeat offenders and suspects. A really significant number of sexual violence cases we're coming across involve suspects that are known to police before for sexual offending history, even if a charge hasn't happened. And so just looking at identifying those repeat offenders and managing the risk and improving the investigations around those. Then comes the pillar that I'm working on, which is looking at improving the way in which the police are engaging with engaging with victim survivors. Then we have a pillar led by Emma Williams, looking at improving officer learning and well-being. So not just training, but expanding that out to how officers are provided with the tools to and knowledge to implement best practice. We then have a pillar looking at the effective use of data and working closely with police analysts, which is led by Dr. Joe Lovett. And we've got another work package that's been recently funded, being led by Dr. Tiggy May, looking at the digital forensics, which is a really controversial area in policing, with concern about the digital strip searches of victim survivors and poor practices around that. So that's another package that's coming into fruition shortly. So as I said, it's a really huge collaborative project, and we're really pleased to be working closely with key policing governance bodies such as the National Police Chiefs Council, the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners and the Home Office, as well as with the various police forces and all the universities that are leading on these work packages. And as I said, in the first year, we're really focusing on these deep dives and forces to understand the practice of what's going on, to try and develop recommendations. But our plan for next year, starting in September, is to try and embed and implement these recommendations into police practice in a sustainable long-term way. And so we'll be working collaboratively with forces to troubleshoot how our recommendations will fit within their practice, within their forces, and how we can take those forward. And we're also going to be using a range of evaluative methods for testing our recommendations and their efficacy before going on to have an independent evaluation. And ultimately, the aim of the project, as I mentioned, is to collect evidence to demonstrate the benefit of academic research for improving forced responses to sexual violence, with a view to eventually developing a national best practice model for rape investigation and practice. And of course, beyond that practice focus, advancing academic knowledge around policing, sexual violence and criminal justice theory as well going forward. So I'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of the talk. So that was a bit of a whirlwind overview into the project, the overarching project. And now I'll talk a bit more about the work package that I've been leading on, which has been, as I said, embedding a procedural justice approach to victim engagement. And again, it's a really large team I've been very lucky to work with in this pillar, including Oona, as Oona mentioned, and Katrin Hohl, but also, Dr. Olivia Smith, who is very kindly taking over for me while I'm on maternity leave for 6 months. A range of postdoctoral research associates and research assistants and project coordinators. So I've been very lucky to work with this large team across the deep dives so far. And just to give you an overview of the focus of the research that I'm taking forward is, as I said, we're really hoping to improve the way in which police engage with victims, but also like victims' experience of the criminal justice process and the rape investigation, through trying to embed a procedural justice approach to victim engagement. So this is trying to make sure that we identify and then embed best practice mechanisms for having a procedurally fair, just and effective victim engagement approach across all of the force response. And so key elements as part of this we see as involving victim survivors, making sure they have practical and comprehensive information about the criminal justice process and their rights, that their experiences are captured and addressed by police forces, and also to ensure that the police are engaging with appropriate support services and victim advocacy organisations to work collaboratively on enhancing victim engagement. So to try and achieve these aims, the pillar has been we're working to establish a system level overview of what current practice looks like, as I said, and this is in the first year, and within each force, because each force actually in England and Wales has a really different structure and different policies relating to how they respond to sexual violence, which might be less of an issue in Scotland with Police Scotland, but because there's so many distinct forces in England and Wales, there's really quite disparate practices going on and structures. We also want to advance an understanding and measurement of current victim experiences of engaging with the police in England and Wales. We know there's a lot of academic experience, so academic evidence out there about poor experiences, but trying to understand how we can operationalise those in a way that can improve police practice is our real focus here. And we're also trying to develop an in-depth understanding of what engagement is looking like on the ground. I think it's very difficult when you're talking to officers to sometimes to get a sense of what it's actually like, you know, in the moment. And so we're trying to get an on-the-ground understanding in real time. So to do this, we're employing a huge range of methods, as you can see, which includes looking at the structural response within each force of that journey that the victim will go through when they make a report or a report is made up until a charging decision. And we'll also look at force policies and the way in which departments are structured, because again, it can really vary across forces. But we're also we're also taking on some police ethnographies or observations of actual rape investigations. So that's RASO stands for Rape and Serious Sexual Offending Investigations, which is a really innovative method in that I don't think it's been done before. And we're very lucky to have the support of forces to place our researchers with sexual violence investigators across the 5 forces, and we're aiming for about over 120 hours of observation for each force, which will give us a really substantial understanding of practice on the ground, watching victim engagement in live, and also talking to officers and victims where appropriate about what's going on. We're also doing a range of focus groups and interviews with officers and consultations with independent sexual violence advocates, victim survivors and stakeholders. We're also analysing police body-worn video and the video recorded statements that victims make about their experiences, and of course consulting academic literature and collating best practice examples. I think we decided we're engaging with victim survivors primarily as experts by experience in the capacity of the first year. So we're engaging with survivor panels to try and advance knowledge and understanding around procedural justice, and also what they're engaging with them about our recommendations to think about developing them going forwards. But in year 2, we're hoping to engage more directly with victim survivors about how their experience of the recommendations that we're trying to implement have worked or otherwise going forward. So I can talk a bit more about that afterwards if anyone's interested. But just to give you a brief overview of the conceptual framework sort of driving our pillar, for those of you that aren't familiar with the concept of procedural justice, procedural justice theory is a hugely influential idea and theoretical framework used in policing studies more broadly, but at the moment it's mostly used in the context of police engagements with members of the public generally, and less so in the context of victims. So it's particularly talked about in the context of stop and search, but also where people are maybe on the receiving end of a criminal justice response, rather than when victims are coming forward to report a crime or engage with the police in that capacity. But we think it has a lot of currency for or potential for developing how we think about victim engagement with police as well. And a key argument that underpins the procedural justice theory is that how officers act in direct encounters with the police impacts their trust and confidence. And I think, if one thing's been clear over the past couple of years is how rocked confidence is in the police in terms of responses to sexual violence, including victim survivors feeling confident they can come forward and report and receive an effective and fair and just response. So a key element, again, of procedural justice theory is thinking about the power that police hold, and the way in which they communicate with members of the public really sends a clear signal about police attitudes and the status they view with that person, and how that's really important for shaping public confidence and perceptions of police legitimacy. I just want to stress as well that our focus in procedural justice in this pillar isn't to say that we think we should be stepping away from trying to improve outcome justice for victim survivors. So we know charge and prosecution rates are appallingly low in England and Wales, and we're not trying to replace that. But we are trying to say that there's so much focus on these outcomes, criminal justice outcomes, that in fact we're not thinking about how we need to extend our understanding of what good police work is to also say that, you know, victim survivors shouldn't be feeling traumatized by the criminal justice process as a result of engaging with the police, and currently the evidence is demonstrating that they very much are. So we need to be improving victim survivors' experiences and trust in the police, and leaving as well as thinking about improving investigations. So some of the key ideas around procedural justice that we're taking, applying with a lens to the deep dives that we're doing, include thinking about how the engagement is oriented around fairness. So we're looking at things about, you know, how is the investigation structured, how is informed consent or otherwise achieved with victim survivors. Are there any biases or rape myths to be challenging as part of that investigative process? Also, that direct engagement with victim survivors. So how, you know, what's the quality of that engagement? Are victim survivors being listened to, understood, involved and informed? I think effectiveness is also a really important dimension of procedural justice. So, you know, are victim survivors receiving a timely service where investigations are being fully carried out in every dimension, and are we listening to victim experiences? And all underpinning this is really thinking about the power that the police have and their positionality, and how that's being conveyed to victim survivors and what impact that's having. So one key element that we're focusing on in terms of trying to develop our understanding of a procedurally just form of victim engagement is by focusing on this academic idea of procedural fairness, which is often broken down into 4 key components, which includes voice, so making sure that victims have active participation in the criminal justice process, they're able to tell their story, and that story is listened to and factored into decision making by police, that victim survivors feel that they're being treated with dignity and respect, so that the police are communicating that they value, that they're associating value to victim survivors and seeing them as individuals and also as citizens. And also this idea of neutrality, so that there's unbiased decision making in the investigation process, and everyone's treated equally regardless of their identity or positionality, so their gender, their race, their ethnicity and their sexual orientation. And also looking at this idea of trustworthiness as well. So victims perceiving that officers are trustworthy and have concern for their well-being, as well as carrying out the investigation and engaging with them. So we think there's a lot of potential in the procedural justice framework, because it's, as I said, it's become such a huge idea in policing generally, and talked about across all of these different fields of policing, such as stop and search, traffic stops, engagement with suspects, but it's really not been looked at in the area of sexual violence, and it's not been looked at in depth in the area of victims either. There is some fantastic emerging feminist work in this area that we're drawing on, and we hope to carry on having in conversations as we develop this work going forward. But I think for us, there are some challenges around embedding a procedural justice approach to victim engagement, which includes that we need to embed these practices and standardize practice across the force, which is quite difficult. But we also don't want a one-size-fits-all approach to procedural justice, because we need the police to be able to accommodate different victim contexts and needs. And I think another key theme for a key point for us that we're really conscious of going forward is that in order to be able to achieve procedural justice for victims, we also need to set up a context in which organisational justice can be achieved for police officers, in that they have the space, knowledge and resources and support they need to fulfil their roles effectively. And yeah, as I'll go on to discuss, I don't think that context is in place right now. So from the deep dives that we've done already, I'm able to speak about some of the key themes that have been coming up for us in terms of what we found and how that's not sitting with our current understanding of procedural justice. So in terms of what that victim journey might be when they're reporting to the police, and how their experience might be, what sort of police encounters they might be experiencing. Concerns we've highlighted include that there's very little continuity for victim survivors. So when they are reporting, they're handed over to multiple different officers who are asking them to repeat their story time and time again, which undermines like rapport and trust, but also makes victim survivors feel like they're not being listened to, and that they're constantly having to relive really difficult conversations when actually that doesn't need to be repeated at so many different contact points. Also, structurally, we've been concerned by there being quite a front loading of the victim investigation. So when a report's made, so much is asked of that victim, all very quickly, and that can really feel like a focus on the victim's credibility rather than the report that they're making. So they might be asked very early on to provide digital evidence when it's not necessarily clear that that's something that's required for the investigation. And they might be interviewed multiple times before the suspect's even spoken to or arrested. And generally that focus on trying to prove in every dimension that what the victim's saying is credible before even speaking to the suspect, we're saying is procedurally unjust, because it should be at the very least a balanced process. And as I'm sure you're all aware, we know that investigations are far too lengthy with multiple administrative delays, but we're also finding repeated missed opportunities for like full and comprehensive investigations. In terms of the way in which the police are engaging with the police, I think we're finding lots of examples of inconsistent support and communications. So some examples of really poor practice, like victims being texted charging decisions saying your case isn't being taken further on like a Friday evening, or having really abrupt phone calls, but also where there is good practice being developed, that's not being shared across forces. So it's really at the moment dependent on which officer you have, as a bit of a luck of the draw situation. And generally, I think key themes have been transactional, rushed victim engagement, and also police forces not engaging with support or specialist services that might be advancing their understanding of victim context, and also enabling victim survivors to provide the best evidence they can, such as like the ISVA services or other support services. So those are some of the key themes and areas of concern that we've identified so far in terms of like victim experience. But also more broadly, we want to turn to think about the broader organizational knowledge and culture of different forces, which can impede effective victim engagement as well. So really clearly, staff have been working with unsustainable workloads, with very little support and opportunity for learning and development, which has led down to a watering of specialism and expertise. So for example, one officer that we spoke to in the last deep dive had over 80 cases of rape cases they were supposed to be supporting victim survivors with, which is just a hugely unsustainable workload. And I think the level of the lack of support and the level of work and lack of resources is really driving or sustaining a stigma on working on rape cases. Officers talked a lot about having victim fatigue as a result, and feeling resigned and ashamed because of this, because they weren't able to give the service that they wanted to. And we also noted rape myths, cynicism, which definitely ties into that idea of victim fatigue as being present in investigation sort of ethos and in certain departments. But also beyond like occupational cultures, in terms of organizational cultures, we also saw like an emphasis on charging and getting a criminal justice outcome, but no incentive or recognition or structure for advancing positive victim engagement or finding ways in which you could achieve an outcome that's meaningful for victim survivors if they're not seeking a criminal justice outcome. So I think, again, there's that organizational focus that isn't looking at successful victim engagement, and just generally very poor use of tracking and use of data to try and understand what the current experience is for victim survivors. At the moment, the real focus on, if there's an issue is looking at complaints, and I think police complaints will represent such a small percentage of negative experiences. It's much more important to like widen up our understanding of what victim experience is like as they're reporting. So those are just some of the key themes, and the recommendations that we're developing as a result are really diverse. So we're looking at structural changes, trying to recalibrate the structure of sexual violence investigation teams to encourage specialism, and of course that needs to be underpinned by adequate resourcing, and emphasising throughout that importance of victim experience and engagement as being successful. Also, we're looking at recalibrating structurally the victim journey. So we're advocating the introduction of one officer as being a single point of contact for victim survivors as they make their report, and changing the way in which the investigation is ordered, to not front load what is asked of victims, but also to try and, working with the other pillars to remove that focus on victim credibility, and just generally being trauma informed, ensuring victim well-being across the investigative process, and making sure that they can achieve their best evidence that they want to give. We're also trying to, beyond encouraging the learning and development of officers, which we definitely are, we're trying to embed best practice protocols across the force as standard policies. So things like standard introduction of a communication plan that's developed with victims, providing a detailed information booklet, structured opportunities for questions and like information about their rights, and also communication templates. So if a charging decision has been made, or if a victim is requesting a right to review, that they're given a detailed letter explaining charging decisions that's written in a appropriate, detailed and like procedurally just way ultimately, and also improving a close partnership working with other support services. Yes, and we're obviously working with the other pillars to look at improving learning and development, as I said, and trying to really tackle through that this idea of victim fatigue, what it means, and rape myths in different contexts, and encouraging organisationally a broader focus on reward and recognition for feedback, for victim engagement, and also embedding feedback and accountability mechanisms. So trying to track victim satisfaction and withdrawal reasons, and also ways in which the police can be held to account if they're not living up to the procedural justice principles that they're now trying to embed across the force. Because, as I said, I don't think the complaints process is sufficient. So just ultimately ways to increase transparency and trust. I think I just want to stress as well that as part of our work, like a concern has been that although although procedural justice has been looking at the impact of policing action in contexts where police action has a disproportionate impact on minoritized communities, at the moment it's really quite high level conceptually in a lot of work, and we're wanting to make sure that we embed an intersectional approach to procedural justice through this pillar. That's really recognising the different contexts and adversities that some minoritized victims might be facing. So I think we're trying to advocate not only policing specialism in terms of developing expertise in rape investigations and victim engagement, but also within that specialism that's engaging with victim survivors from different communities. So having particular understanding and spaces for learning where we can talk about how best to engage victim survivors with disabilities or neurodiversity, for example, from Black and minoritized communities, from those that might be, different backgrounds, LGBT victims and migrant and refugee victims, to name but a few, and really encouraging the police to engage in contextual safeguarding and engagement. And we see as a key part of that them working with specialist support services. And yeah, I'm happy to talk more about that at the end. So that's in terms of practice recommendations where we're going with the project. I think more broadly in terms of like the academic contribution we're hoping to make, certainly from this year, is thinking about how we can advance understandings of procedural justice more broadly, given its lack of engagement with victim survivors of sexual violence historically. So I think some really interesting themes coming up from us in our engagement with officers about procedural justice has been, it's really been a light bulb moment for some officers about why, as a framework for explaining why victim survivors would benefit from some of these changes, because it's not seen as procedurally fair, and that's more important to them, or that should be of equal importance to them as also achieving like justice in that traditional criminal justice sense. So I think initially officers have been very focused on, well, a victim won't be happy if we're not able to prosecute the suspect that they've, you know, the offender that they've reported to the police. But actually saying, you know, there are other actions you can take to not to have a make them feel like when they're leaving this experience, regardless of their charging outcome, that what you have done has been just and fair. But some of the sticking points that have come out from our discussion with officers is they're struggling to recognise the really significant power that they do hold in these interactions and how much sway that can have over the victim experience, you know, as a police officer taking this case forward, and also situating that sexual violence victim survivor within the broader context of stigma around sexual violence in society. Also thinking about, yeah, intersectionality and how different complexities to cases might mean that they should adjust their approach. And also that idea of neutrality, I think, is really interesting in the context of sexual violence, because obviously there's this there's different schools of thought around believing survivors, and the importance of belief and not being cynical, but then officers also having this approach of saying, well, we need to be neutral evidence gatherers. And is that possible in a world where we know, yeah, survivors of sexual violence are experiencing trivialization and minimization every day, including in the and also rape myths in society, but particularly in the criminal justice context. So we're really interested in trying to unpack these ideas a bit more, and just generally these key components of procedural fairness around voice, dignity, respect, neutrality and trustworthiness have not really been conceptually developed beyond their use in, they've been quite operationalized as is in procedural justice theory, but we want to try and understand what these mean in the grounded context of for victims, survivors of sexual violence who are reporting to the police. So we're hoping to develop this by looking at the policing research that we've been doing, but also in consultation with victim survivors, as I mentioned earlier, to try and develop this intersectional grounded understanding of procedural fairness for victim survivors going forward. So that's a bit of conceptual work we're hoping to develop as well. But just to wrap up, yeah, the key things that we're producing from this project this year includes reports for each of the forces that we've been working with you know, findings of our deep dives and analysis and recommendations. But we're also producing some like policy practice resources that are being used by some police forces now, including like a communication plan template for clearly outlining communication practices with victim survivors, an information and support booklet that will be given to victims about the criminal justice process when reporting rape. As I mentioned before, communication templates that officers are using when like communicating a charging decision, for example. And we're also developing, this work's being led by Katrin Hohl and Olivia Smith, a robust and effective victim feedback mechanism using a victim survivor survey that all police forces that we're working with will be dispensing to victim survivors once the charging decision has been made. So these are just some of the things that are coming out of the project on top of the academic papers that will also follow. So I think that's me exactly 40 minutes. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening, and yeah, look forward to hearing any questions anyone might have.